Hanie, I'm really excited for our first LinkedIn Live here. It's been a long time coming. You and I have worked together for a long time, um, really focused on responsible AI and trustworthy AI. So I'm hopeful that we can have a dialogue not only amongst ourselves but with all of the nice people in these online communities. And I would encourage everyone to ask questions, give us your comments. We definitely want to. We all know that trustworthy AI, trusted AI is super important. We want to make sure that we're incorporating as many inputs and perspectives as possible. So with that, let's first start with please in the comment section letting us know where you're tuning in from, because a lot of the regulations, which we'll probably end up talking a fair amount about, have a are particular to a certain location. So the EU or Singapore or the United States all seem to have different perspectives on what it means to have trustworthy AI. So please let us know where you're tuning in from, and let's make this as interactive as possible. Okay. So Hanie, let's start by let me just ask you from your perspective. You, as our global AI ethicist, have worked with a lot of customers, and I'm interested to know what is driving a focus among customers for trusted AI or responsible use of technology. What are your thoughts on that?
So a lot of it is coming from the fact that, in recent years, it became quite apparent that regardless of the industry, regardless of the use case, you really need to think about trust when you're building an AI system. So the organizations are picking up, they're becoming aware of uh, the type of uh, use cases that they have and the way that they need to think about bringing responsibility into their system. And in addition to that, these type of frameworks is actually beneficial to them. Not only prevents reputational damage, but it also creates a standardized framework for them that they can work with.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I see we have people tuning in. One from Cleveland, Ohio. That's my stomping grounds. I'm a tortured Cleveland Browns fan, and another from Detroit, Michigan. So great that you're here. Feel free to add comments as we get going. Hania, you mentioned a lot of frameworks, but taking a step back, are you familiar with the AI incident database, which is a nonprofit is categorizing a lot of public AI incidents and missteps of this technology? Have you had a chance to look at that, and what are your thoughts on that?
So it's an interesting database in the sense that they really did a great job of capturing and tracking all these AI incidents that made headline. I believe they have over 1,300 records there, and it shows us for each of these incidents what went wrong, and we can use it as a way to learn from it and be prepared that next time we won't make that mistake. And thinking about how we can improve our processes to avoid some another record in their database. And I know that you also have a lot of thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The AI incident database is a great resource and shows the many ways uh, that this machine learning technology can go awry, and it helps organizations understand general themes so you can think not only of the benefits. We're going to generate new revenue or improve our efficiencies, but also balance it and identify themes which could be impacting stakeholders incorrectly or in a way that we aren't expecting. For those of you who are tuning in, I would ask if you've ever felt victimized by an algorithm and what that felt like. So if anyone has any comments, I myself, believe that as a practitioner, we have to be very proactive in our thinking about stakeholders. Whether you're a data scientist or whether you're a business practitioner or someone even as a consumer, right? And so those are some of the things that we're focusing on here at DataRobot. And you mentioned a lot of frameworks, right? and it's driving our customers this benefit of the technology, which is disruptive, which will improve a business operation to such a great extent, but having to do it in a thoughtful manner. Um, would you say just generally within customers, the ones you've interacted with, that governance is a growing concern for the use of machine learning tech?
Oh, absolutely. In pretty much every conversation that we have with our customers or even our prospects, it's coming up. They're thinking about what are the ways that they can implement a governance framework and processes in their workflow, or even they already have one and they're trying to improve it and add to the framework and processes that they have.
Yeah, you mentioned process there and a focus on process. Um, when we're engaging with clients, we talk about people and process and technology. DataRobot's a technology company, but machine learning is so complicated to implement and implement in a responsible manner that really is a focus on people and process as well. Do you have any thoughts on what it takes to get people involved in AI governance and responsible use of tech?
So you pretty much touched on it when we are thinking about bringing people in and having a responsible AI system. We need to think about people. We need to think about all different personas who are touching the system, whether it's at the ideation time that we are thinking about how to formulate the problem, all the way to we have a model and we are deploying it and now we are monitoring it. So at each of these stages along the side, there are different personas involved. So we need to understand them. We need to understand their needs. And based on that, be able to train them, be able to give them all the resources that they need. So that's pretty much the first step when we are thinking about building and incorporating trust into AI systems. And as you touched on, the next step is the process aspect of it. And I actually would like to know your thoughts on that.
Sure. Um, yeah, so, you know, these systems, it used to be going back, when I started my data science career, that we were very excited to just get a model into production. And we didn't think about the process by which we pulled the data, ensured that we had data integrity, the data quality checks or runtime assertions, let alone monitoring and workflow approvals, so that when I build a model, someone has to approve it or review it. We were just so excited to get a model in production. We pop champagne. But now I think the industry has become much more sophisticated in its thought and realizes that the model build is just one sliver in an entire workflow. And so you need a robust set of processes to help ensure consistency of the technology. Just like there are standardized approaches to setting up a SQL database, there should be standardized approaches and processes to follow when putting in machine learning and even replacing existing models. Um, what I like to when I talk to customers and those in the industry, I like to say that we're really bringing system safety engineering aspects to machine learning. It's not to say that this is new. It's to say that we're applying some system safety engineering, a long-standing tradition of quality management, and bringing it to this domain, right? And so, from me, it starts with people. You mentioned talking about addressing people's needs. Talk to the audience about an impact assessment. Kind of what are the tenets of that impact assessment and why it's valuable. I would love to hear your thoughts, particularly around the work that you did with Adecco.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've learned is when we are thinking about impact assessment, the best way to get information is to actually interview people, everyone, all the teams and individuals who are involved in the process of building that AI system. And starting from the beginning, what was the justification of building this system? Why did you decide it? What motivated you to, start thinking about using AI systems? And taking it from there, what kind of data you use, how did you collect the data, what was the governance around it, and any type of data prep that you've done on it. We need to know exactly what happened there. And then it goes on to understanding your model building process, the way that you evaluated your system, and if it's relevant. In some cases, bias and fairness is something to consider. So what are the ways that you measured bias? Why did you decide on a certain definition? How did you measure it? And as part of the risk that might happen, is the risk of bias. What are the actions that you're taking in these situations? Whether if it's mitigation, whether if it's policy changes that you may want to have in your system. So we want to capture all this information, how to integrate the model that you have into your existing infrastructure, and how to monitor it at the end, because when this model goes live, you need to be able to monitor it over time and evaluate its performance and its behavior over time.
Yeah. I tend to agree. I think a thoughtful impact statement up front, touching on the topics of that you mentioned, the benefits, who's going to be impacted, how are we getting the data, how are we using the data, how do we want to what's the security around the algorithm itself. That kind of thoughtful, kind of qualitative exercise really helps ensure success. I've had models struggle to be put into production at previous companies because we couldn't align all the stakeholders. We couldn't align the internal project dynamics because there's so many people that get in that work on an ML project, right? You have the line of business leader thinking that the use of this technology can help their operation. You have the people that create the data, like generate the data and then extract it from, let's say, a data lake. You have others that build models, right? And they can be data scientists, citizen data scientists, or like yourself, like a PhD astrophysicist, right? And then downstream, you have people that have to inherit that model and work with IT and get that into some sort of production. And then even after it's in production, think about how you're going to monitor it. How are you going to have runtime assertions on it? That type of impact assessment up front, which is a qualitative exercise, really does help focus the entire project and make sure it improves your chances of success. That you will put a model in, you'll get it into production, and it'll actually deliver the value that you expect. Um,
Absolutely. And, throughout the interviews that we had, we found that, by asking questions, there are times that people are on the fly thinking about it and they're coming up, oh, I never thought about that aspect of it. Yes, that could be a concern. That could be an impact that we might have not noticed in the past. So it definitely has a lot of impact in terms of improving the system and making sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering if anyone watching has suggestions for uh, ways that they've stewarded projects. Right? Do you get a scrum together and you have a cross functional scrum, or is it siloed where you have a business line leader saying this is what I need, and then the data scientist goes off? I'm interested for what people out there are thinking for aspects of implementing these systems that have worked for them, to make sure that they deliver these projects. Let's switch a little bit, though, while we wait for those comments to come in, Hanye. I mentioned earlier that our focus is always people, right, in the aspect of the impact assessment, and then proper processes. Um, how do you think about, or how do you approach understanding risk within a system? What type of processes could be in place for a system, for a project planning team or an ML team, thinking about the process around risk for a system?
Mhm. So there are different ways that we can think about it, and there are different kind of guidelines out there. But one of the simplest ones is to think about the type of decision that the system is making. Is it a low risk in terms of you might be losing $5 here, $10 there because you put a ad in a wrong place, or it's a little bit more serious, better if it might involve injuries, or in a severe cases, it might involve death.
Mm,
So depending on the type of decision that the system is making, you may want to think about different ways to bring humans as part of this system. Sometimes it's just a simple maintenance or improving the system. Sometimes it's actually thinking about the risk assessment. And in kind of the severe cases, you may want the human to actually make the final judgment.
mhm.
So you would use AI as kind of a guide, an insight, an aid for the human to make the final decision. But in order to kind of have that type of risk assessment, you need to think about the severity and the probability of the risk happening. And you can label them. For example, if the severity is high and the probability is high, you may want to label it as a high risk, and so on and so forth. High, medium, low, depending on how you look at it. And based on that, you may want to have a framework that, depending on what happens, you may have a flow chart of how to proceed based on the severity of it and the action that the organization can take when those type of risks happen. So we can think about it this way, but you also have a lot of experience in this area, so I want to know your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, not surprisingly, I suppose we are calibrated. I think um, generally, I've worked in a long time in this space, and I don't like over-engineered processes because that can be constrictive at a time when the technology needs to be implemented at a fast pace. What you need are the right types of processes, and I think what you described there makes a lot of sense. In that careful planning done through an impact assessment, you start to understand ultimately, is this decision of a low impact to stakeholders or the business, or high impact? And that can definitely range, like you said, from I'm placing ad banners on online, and maybe I waste my budget for the day, and I have a model that's predicting the probability of a click. Certainly, on the other end, you think about medical imaging and scanning, looking for tumors and things like that. That's the type of thing that machine learning is a narrow and sometimes brittle technology, and it could find a tumor in a scan, in a medical scan. Um, but it's certainly up to the patient and the doctor to ultimately make that decision. So I agree kind of with that spectrum and understanding where your machine learning project lies. I think um, I would probably spend more time on the severity and likelihood, though. Like, understand, in that case, the severity of that impact, but then how likely is the system going to give you the wrong answer? Um, and I've seen this in a couple different ways amongst some clients, right? They'll have an adaptive policy framework where they say score a severity from 1 to 5 and score a likelihood of that risk from 1 to 5, multiply the two together, and then you come up with some process for what to do given high values or low values. To me, that's false precision. That's just my opinion. And I would try and have harder definitions. This is critical to our business. It cannot fail. And it's a low likelihood event. Okay, well, then we need certain runtime assertions or something to the model. That's how I would approach it from a process standpoint. And that kind of leads me to the last kind of core tenet of what it is you and I focus on to a large extent, is around technology and the use of technology to enforce some of those risk mitigations. You have written the code within DataRobot to actually help identify statistical bias, right? Um, and quite honestly, a lot of it's over my head. But one of the things that we are working on currently is bias mitigation, and that is something that can absolutely help in certain use cases reduce the disparate impact, let's say, that a model could have. What are kind of the for those of us who may be lesser data scientists than yourself, Hania, what are some of the kind of broad themes on how you would mitigate bias technologically?
Mhm. So when we are thinking about mitigation, there are three stages that you can intervene. The first stage is to try to reduce bias in your data. That could be by just adding some weights to your data in order to for the model to prioritize the unprivileged groups in your data. Or it could be more sophisticated, trying to reduce the correlation between different features that you have in your data and also your target, your labels with the protected attributes that you're looking at. The second stage is during the modeling, the same way that you enforce uh, constraints on the model to learn the more accurate patterns, you can insert certain constraints to also force the model to learn fairer patterns in this when it's learning from your data.
Hmm.
And then the last stage is when you already have your predictions. You try to mitigate it and you try to uh, modify your predictions in order for your system to be more fair. So depending on what stage is more relevant to you, depending on which stage you have data or you can intervene. Uh, these are three stages that you can work with in order to reduce bias.
So the way you describe it, would you say that you can do mitigation at different points in the workflow, either the data or the model, or even post at inference when you have a prediction? Is that kind of the high level?
Absolutely, you're right on point.
I'm just trying to keep up, honey. That's all. So I think that's great. The interesting thing about our space is that it is also there's some emerging regulations that I've seen, and you as well. Um, Within the EU, there's the AI Act, and that identifies high risk use cases and specifically asks for documentation and conformity assessments to certain governance and statistical measures, let's say, that demonstrate good faith in high risk use cases. There's also some in the US that I've seen related to putting together impact assessments and privacy concerns. Those are all proposals, none of them are law yet. What's your thinking with this type of legislation or proposed legislation? My feeling is that this will actually clear up ambiguity for practitioners and help us all adopt this technology in a way that broadens and helps helps expand the use of this technology. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree with that?
Oh no, I completely agree. Because right now, what we have in the areas that we don't have regulations, some industries are highly regulated, so they have their own framework that they follow. But for industries who don't have that, uh, a lot of times this is on data scientists to figure out how I
Yeah.
should actually define fairness. What should I do in case if I identify bias, or what way should I use in order to mitigate it?
Yeah.
So, and company A might do it one way, company B might do it in a different way, and both of them might be working on similar use cases.
Sure.
So that having a clear framework of, as you said, what is a high risk use case and what are the general guidelines that we have, how should we approach it, that really helps, all these different organizations to have a good understanding and have a standard way of approaching these type of problems.
Mhm, mhm, absolutely. And, one of the things I really like about our space is that, many, organizations in our ecosystem are willing to have a discussion around trustworthy AI, because if we need to figure it out together as a community, whether it's, data fluent management, whether that is the data science practitioner space or otherwise, we actually have an upcoming, AWS joint webinar where we're bringing one of the clients that you worked with, Adecco, to talk about trustworthy AI. It's going to be hosted on Tech Target. It'll be on demand November 2nd. And it's really around, although AWS and DataRobot are oftentimes working hand in hand with clients, having us alongside each other comparing best practices and bringing a customer who had a high risk use case, I think is going to be really an interesting a thoughtful discussion. What can you tease about that customer and their use case? What was their use case?
So the use case that they had was around hiring. So they're a staffing company, and part of it is to recommend a short list of candidates to their clients. So they wanted to use AI to improve their processes and efficiency, as you mentioned. So this is the type of engagement that we had. We tried to help them write an impact assessment for the use case that they have. And as you mentioned, this is a high risk use case based on the proposed EU AI regulation. And they wanted to also think about bias and fairness aspect of it. So this is also another area that we work with them to understand what are their needs, how we can think about fairness in their context, and what are the ways that we can move forward with regards to um, their processes, and providing them guidance on, what we talked about around mitigation, if that would be something that would become necessary for them.
Yeah. So you helped collaborate with this high risk use case along these lines of people and process and tech. And you promised to share more when we have this webinar on November 2nd.
Absolutely, we're going to dive into each of them in more details and talk about how we actually brought it up in their use case.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to learning more, certainly, and hopefully others are as well. That's all the time that we have today. But feel free to keep adding comments or anything. Hani and myself will be checking our LinkedIn to check with comments and answer any questions people may have. Thanks a lot for the time, Hani.
Yeah, thank you.